And here they are, doctors Robin Goldstein and Daniel Sumner. Join me now. Gentlemen, you both have PhDs, so I like to call people with PhDs doctors. Is that okay with you, Robin?
No.
And Dan, you don't like it either, I'm guessing.
No.
Well,
whatever you do, don't call me Dr. Dan.
Well, that would mean you'd have to that sounds like a fake
Exactly.
doctor with a TV show.
Yeah.
Oh, it's Dr. Dan. It's the weed show with Dr. Dan. No, we won't
Okay,
do that
good.
to you.
We're in
serious.
agreement then.
You are. This is how I want to position you both. This is what I think of you, not knowing either of you at all. You're serious scholars and analysts who do have great personality, sense of humor. Is that fair, Dan?
I'll take it.
Is that fair about Dan, Robin?
Dan's got a great sense of humor. I won't speak about myself, but
well, gentlemen, let's just start kind of at the beginning. It has a lot of names. You referred to it as weed, and you say why, Robin? Why do you call it weed and not pod or cannabis or marijuana?
So marijuana was the word that was used for many years, and that was actually a word that came from Mexico. It was a Spanish word that was adopted by the U.S. government basically as a racial slur. So when weed was first illegalized in the 1930s, as you probably know, they were putting up signs, posters all over the country, propaganda saying weed kill, weed's a killer, and there were pictures of Mexican men smoking weed, raping white women, stuff like this, and they named it marijuana to associate it with Mexicans and to play off people's horrible racial stereotypes. And so that's the reason we don't say marijuana. The word cannabis has been adopted by a lot of states in the legalization process. It sounds more medical, it sounds more technical, but cannabis actually covers a category that's much broader than what we call weed. It includes hemp, for example. Hemp cloth is made from the cannabis plant. We call it weed mostly because that's what people call it informally. We all know what we mean when we say weed. We mean a product that gets you high, that has psychoactive properties that you can smoke or consume.
All right, so that's a great explanation. Now, Dan, do you want to make a few more noises with your computer before I get to my next question for you? Because I can't edit it out.
Okay, I'm ready for you.
All right, you are a serious dude. You were the Assistant Secretary of Economics at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. You have a PhD in economics. How is the weed market different from pretty much every other thing that grows in the ground and is sold at mass scale?
The biggest difference is it's more expensive. The rest of it is similar. It's supply and demand. In California, outdoor weed at the farm level is down to a couple $100 a pound or so. Supply and demand. Oversupply, prices collapse. I cut my teeth doing tobacco economics when I was a professor in North Carolina. I've done a lot of wine economics, as well as corn and soybeans. And weed has characteristics of all of those. Even the illegal market. I wrote a paper about smuggling cigarettes, for example. So weed has lots of characteristics that are similar to all of these things, but one difference is it's really valuable product per pound. A pound of weed is worth what a ton of something else is worth.
Right. So, but let me just differentiate between the cost at purchase versus the cost of production. You're not saying, if I understand you right, that weed costs more to grow, to manufacture, and in legal weed to market and so on, than tomatoes or strawberries. You're saying we pay more for it at the point of sale, or am I misunderstanding you?
It's really both. And I think it's really important for people to realize growing weed at the farm, it's also expensive, mostly because of labor. So, and remember, you take these flowers, how many flowers on a plant, how many flowers can you grow on an acre? But then you dry them and you trim them. And so the product that you're actually selling, you don't get very much stuff in that dried form that people want. And it really is expensive per acre. the best Cabernet Sauvignon from Napa, incredible wine, $10 a pound. Weed, hundreds, thousands a pound.
So the big question, I think, that anybody that knows even a little bit about weed, the markets, and you answer this a lot in different ways, Robin, is can legal weed prices ever become more sufficiently competitive with illegal weed prices? I think the first question, though, is why are they not competitive?
There's a few reasons why they're not competitive. I'd say the biggest one of all is that you have a lot of taxes and regulations, disproportionate compared with other agricultural industries. But another reason that's maybe just as important is that the businesses that are in this market right now are coming from a history of the people who've been growing weed for the last 100 years are coming from a history of doing things illegally. They're not used to running legal businesses. And so there's a lot of barriers to get into any legal business from an illegal one. And in states where you have medical history of medical marijuana, often that was unregulated. I just said medical marijuana. That was a major crime, medical weed. But you have everything from getting local permits to filing your taxes on time to knowing what consultants and lawyers and accountants to work with. That's just harder for folks getting into this business than people who've been in running agribusiness for many years on a larger scale. So time, one of the things you see across the country in different states that have legalized is the cost and therefore the price comes down over time. The cheapest weed in America right now is in Colorado and Washington, and those were the first two states to legalize recreational. So it takes time to get for companies to get up to scale, and also for regulations to adjust to problems that they run into initially.
What about the cost, gentlemen, of promotion and marketing? Like, obviously, every weed company, if you can, I guess one of the best things you can do now is hook up with a celebrity, from Tommy Chung to who's another one that is attached their name to a marijuana, a weed brand. Forgive me, huh?
Snoop Dogg.
Snoop Dogg.
Yeah. So, but like, is my friend Mike, who sells weed on the side, he doesn't do any advertising or marketing. His whole business is word of mouth. So how much of a cost is that for the legal weed businesses market?
Well, what they have to, so what they have to do, of course, is if you're going to pay $10 million to a celebrity and you can sell $10 million worth of weed, you're not going to make it. You just spent $10 million to advertise it, but you better, in other words, if you could sell $1 billion worth of weed, then easy. So you really have to scale. I mean, one of the things about paying a lump sum amount to a celebrity is you better be big scale. Mike doesn't have to do that.
Yeah.
Right.
And by the way, I was going to add, in California, we have a lot of small producers who are trying to compete with those big celebrity type guys, and it's really hard for them to spend the kind of money that you would possibly need to do that.
I think Seth Rogen must be one of the biggest names in terms of celebrities.
Well, if you count out how much weed he's smoked in his movies put together, then that's a good sign.
It's a lot. It's a good point. And I know that he's getting out ahead or not. I think we are, from the movies at least. You have a ton of stats and charts in your book. So layouts, I want to get to some of the interesting ones. For example, I think the California market, the statistics, and I'm not sure exactly how, there probably is an issue with tracking illegal sales of anything. How do you know? But I think the statistic was, in the California weed market, 3/4 is still black market, under the table, illegal, and 1/4 is at a store, taxed, marketed, grown, and regulated. So that's an interesting and important stat. Unpack that one and share with me anything else you want to about the illegal and legal markets. Either one of you. I'm not sure who to ask these questions to. You guys know which is better, and we can alternate.
Yeah, so the legal market in California is still developing, but the most important thing to recognize is the illegal market was there a very long time first. And so California growing weed illegally, a lot of that is still shipped around the country. and so probably the share of total cannabis grown in California is more illegal, even more than 3/4. Within the state, remember the proposition that you're facing the consumer with. Gee, you've been smoking weed in California. You know a guy who knows a guy. You've been reasonably happy with the product. Now the state comes in and says, "Oh, we've made it legal. Now you can leave your neighborhood, drive out to the mall, and go to a store and buy it from somebody you've never met, and pay twice as much." Sound like a good deal? You say, "I don't think so." So,
Right.
you know, the first question is, why would anybody buy legal weed in California? And there are reasons, and so 1/4 of the weed gets sold that way. I think that's the biggest story there. In terms of how we figure out the data, I could go into the details there if you want to.
Anything you want to add, Robin, in terms of the difference in the two markets?
I would add that it's important to remember that there's no penalty for buying, possessing, or smoking illegal weed. So from the consumer standpoint, it's it looks like weed, it tastes like weed, smells like weed, and it's impossible, so far as we can tell, for consumers to differentiate from smoking it, whether this was made by a licensed producer or not. So the products are basically similar. There are some products that you're seeing evolve on the legal market that you didn't have in the illegal market, like specialized types of tinctures or new types of edibles, or vape, some kinds of vape pens. You're now even seeing a lot of illegal vape pens. So because consumers can't necessarily tell the difference and there's no penalty for them, again, that makes the calculation a pretty tough one for them to be convinced to buy legal weed.
My moral argument is that I want everybody to have to pay into the price of civilization for whatever they do. So if they're growing weed and they're using, resources that are community resources, then they should have to pay taxes. Nobody ever pays all their taxes, whatever, but I don't know. I want to pay someone who pays into the system morally. I don't know if you guys write about that in the book or want to even talk about that, but I just wanted to opinionate for a second there on my own.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, Pete, and let me reinforce it. So a part of that 1/4 are people that say, yeah, one, I can afford it and I'm willing to do it, and I want to support this industry being legal, and the way I can do that is buying legal. I agree 100%. From the producer point of view, you could say, gee, most of my customers aren't like Pete, and do I want to go through the process of waiting 3 years to get my license, basically have no way to make a living for 3 years in order to become legal? And a lot of growers said, no, thank you. A lot of wholesalers and retailers said, no, thank you. I've got a customer base. I'll stick with them.
A lot of buyers of weed are, well, some people are concerned about what's in it. How strong is it? How potent is it? Is it laced with anything? Certainly a lot of parents, my peers, because I have teenagers, I constantly hear from them saying that. And I'm always like, I don't think we have really many instances of that. I just think it's really potent for a lot of people, and we can talk about the impacts. But I think that how much of a concern is it for the consumer? How interested in it are they? And is it a myth that regulated legal weed is pretty well regulated in terms of what's in it, not unlike food and drugs, the FDA and FD, the other regulatory agencies? Like, what's in it. And by the way, we're not just talking about flour. I mean, we're talking about candy and anything that you can consume. You can put weed in it. And my understanding is, with the legal market, there's so much regulation. They have to know what's in it, the ingredients, and so on. Is that true? Is it all myths?
Oh, that's absolutely true. So, and it's labeled, and you can tell from the label that it's safety tested, tested for things like, and there's potency. You have, even in the old unregulated medical markets, you did have some people testing for potency, maybe not the majority, but how strong is it? That's like the number one basic question. But I think the bigger differentiators with legal weed in most of the states that have legalized recreational is they've imposed all these other testing standards, heavy metals, contaminants, moisture content, microbials, E. coli, stuff like that, as well as some other things that consumers or voters might care about that don't necessarily translate directly to health problems, like pesticides. There's not a lot of evidence that pesticides in weed necessarily cause health hazards. The jury is kind of still out. There's just not much research on it. But people may care about not using pesticides for reasons beyond just
Sure.
health. So I do think that all of those safety tests, the mandatory testing, is the biggest differentiator between legal and illegal weed, as you say, Pete.
By the way, I like to say, I mean, I've used pesticides. I'm not perfect, but I always like to say to these people that are not worried about pesticides, I want to tell them to go take a swim in the Gulf of Mexico, which has the entire Mississippi of worth of runoff in it, and you can find starfish with eyes. Okay, I just made that all up, but I think it's funny. All right, so the big question, the real big question to me, is simple economics here. I have read over and over that in states like California and Oregon, where there's huge markets, there's too much supply and not enough demand because of the law that you're only allowed to sell the weed you grow to the people in your state. Meaning, if you grow hundreds of millions of pounds, whatever the measurement is, in California, but there's not enough of a market, not enough Californians buying it, then okay, you can sell it to the rest of the country and you don't have to worry about it. And that would go the same for cotton and apples and blueberries and any other market. There's nothing else like this, is my understanding. If I grow blueberries in New York, I can sell them to anybody who wants. So this is my big question. You guys answer this question, I think, pretty well. If the entire country were to make it legal, then we wouldn't have that issue that so many states are dealing with of an oversupply. First of all, did I articulate that right? Is that accurately framed? And second of all, what's the deal here, Dan?
Yeah, so you're a free market economist, and I love that about you, Pete. This is great.
Easy. You're gonna damage my Marxist bona fides.
Yeah, that's right. The free market Marxists were for it. So you're exactly right. I would say the free trade agreement that is really important to the world is the U.S. Constitution that says states can't block trade, and that's been great. So it's true. All you had to, if you made cannabis kale, you don't need a bunch of regulations. You don't need a bunch of federal taxes. You just say hands off cannabis. States will deal with it, and that imposes a kind of a free trade across cannabis. Where any place it's legal in the U.S., great. What Robin and I agree on as well is it's really hard to know where it's going to be grown. Will it be indoor cannabis grown in Washington state where they have hydropower and electricity is cheap? Not California, where electricity is higher than anywhere except Hawaii. So for indoor cannabis, which is the high potency, high quality, as it's now measured by price, maybe it won't be California at all. What about labor costs? Labor is really one of the reasons cannabis is expensive is there's a lot of labor built into the growing and trimming, and labor's not cheap in California. Gee, maybe it'll be Idaho. The labor's a lot cheaper in Idaho. Maybe it'll be Mississippi where labor's even cheaper. So we don't really know where cannabis will really be grown once you make it legal. That's something that there's real money if you can figure that out first.
What does the Canadian market tell us?
They aren't nearly as liberalized as I was federally legal, but lots of restrictions still. So we don't quite yet know.
Okay. And it's different in different provinces. So in some provinces in Canada, you have total state control over it, where the state is essentially producing the cannabis. And in other places, it looks more like California. But it's important also that Canada as a market, the entire country is about the size of the California market.
That's true for almost every product.
Right. Yeah. We hear so much about California, and we should. And I think the point you mentioned about labor and resources is such an important point, especially when it comes to California. And I'm guessing you're talking about water more than anything else.
No, not really, because yield is so high in value per acre. You can grow all the cannabis you want with almost, proportionally speaking, about as much water as, I don't know, watermelons might use. This is not almonds. This isn't alfalfa. It's whether it's indoor or outdoor, you're talking about a few thousand acres total. So it's labor, but it's not the other resources. It's not land, and maybe it's not sunshine. If indoor takes over, it's where's electricity cheap?
Right. So we're really talking about electricity for lighting and fans and I don't know what else, but
and then labor. And so you want quality labor. And of course, we all know. Robin might tell you that Utah is going to be the future of cannabis, but we'll let him say it.
Well, I remember I went out to Colorado in 2011, 12, and I got a tour of a legal indoor grow, and we went on the roof, and it was covered in solar panels, and that was enough electricity for that grow. Why is that not the case in sunshine states? What are we missing about solar powered energy, which is a lot cheaper and hopefully more efficient soon with batteries, versus all the traditional more expensive sources of energy? Can't you just cover your indoor grow with solar panels, gentlemen?
I've never heard that that's enough electricity.
Okay.
And of course the battery issue, we all know, we're all waiting for batteries. Somebody told me the other day, you just use the battery in your car to run your refrigerator. So that is, maybe we'll get batteries to power our house with our Tesla. We'll see.
Yeah, well, that would be another book.
That's great.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So who wants to tell me a little bit about Sabrina's story, which I think is a fascinating chapter in your new book, Can Legal Weed Win?
Yeah. So it's a cool story because back when I was in college, I used to subscribe to the NORML, National Organization for Reform of Marijuana Laws. And I used to get these, kind of activist emails about how the movement to legalize weed. And they always came from Sabrina at NORML. About 15 years later, by chance came in contact with her again, discovered that she'd left NORML, she'd been in the weed industry and had gone through a lot of interesting challenges and processes in California, in Berkeley, where she'd kind of seen it all. She was involved in the effort to pass Prop 64, which is the ballot question that legalized in California in 2016, that was implemented in 2018. And so the interesting thing about her story is here's just like this pure-hearted activist who had every good intention to make this work, to make legal weed work, legal weed win. And she discovered, the hard way, the political process and how difficult it was to craft a law that was workable. And once you get all these special interest groups, and so she told me all these interesting stories about the political process and the back and forth on getting all these things in from the unions and from law enforcement. And once you integrate all these interest groups' needs into a law, you end up with this big unwieldy thing that may or may not be workable. The state was then charged with writing regulations to follow all these things that have been passed by the ballot question. And then she was forced to contend with the system that she'd helped set up, and kind of was really honest in a really touching way for me about the good things and also the mistakes that were made along the way and what she learned from it.
Yeah, it's a really interesting story and important, and illustrates, I think, so much of what you're trying to say here. Dan, let me just ask you though. Go ahead.
I enjoyed two things about Sabrina. One, that she existed. I assumed she was like Alexa. I said, Robin, come on. There's the Sabrina at
NORML, right?
This isn't a real person, I don't know what fantasies you were living with when you were 23 years old, but Sabrina's just,
yeah, Sabrina's just a guy named William in his basement, but no, she's a real person. You have a picture of her in the book.
Yeah, so there you go. And but secondly, the transition of Sabrina thinking, the solution to all problems is to have more government regulation. So free market for cannabis meant having the government involved at every step. She now has evolved to being, free market Pete. And that's it's a transition that who would have guessed?
he's he's so hurtful, Robin. He's attacking me at my core. So you understand the economics of, as you mentioned, so many other of these products, Dan. In terms of the future of regulation, we see a lot of regulation, obviously, on other things like tobacco and alcohol and other things that are considered certainly unhealthy to consume. Basically, things with sugar now, you're even starting to see people wanting more labels, much less regulation on. Where are we at right now with the current legal weed paradigm in terms of regulation and the effect it has on price? You hear this from pretty much every grower or store owner, the complaints about all these things that they have to do just moment to moment, frankly, much less day to day. Where are we now, and where do you guys see that going? Will that become more streamlined and easier? Has it in any markets in any states?
I think it will. It has and it will. And partly it's people looking over their shoulder at places that have been a little less onerous. And it, every one of these regulations are great. Aren't they wonderful? They all have a good purpose. So we want equity. Well, that means we have to inspect who's getting a license and making sure they're the right people. We all want smaller companies. So we're going to have a set of regulations related to how big the company can be. We all want environmental stuff. We don't want pesticides. All of these things are great. None of them are free. And then they all take bureaucracy. So which means it takes you a year and a half or 2 years or 3 years or 4 years to get your license, because they're going to, it's like going to the proctologist once a week. Ask somebody in the business. This is a really onerous set of regulations. And part of it for people that used to be illegal, it's the stuff. What do you mean I have to pay taxes? What do you mean I have to fill out an environmental form for the county? Well, every business has to do that. The almond grower has to do that. And I do think we're moving away from it, gradually streamlining as we learn. And we won't get away from it altogether, of course.
One of the onerous issues for me trying to buy weed at it's like when it first became legal, it still is the case. When I walk into those stores, I just get like a child in a toy, like me at Toys R Us when I was little. I can't believe there's so many annoying things that you have to do. And the most annoying thing was you always had to have cash. Like, who carries cash anymore? Has that changed?
Nope.
No, I mean, many stores have ATM machines in there, or some of them will have like ATM-like setups.
I don't even know my PIN anymore. My wife just gives me money.
Yeah, cash is almost gone, except in the weed world.
Yeah,
true.
So as we look ahead to the future, and you guys also write a lot about the lobbyists. It's so interesting to see former Senate Majority Leader Tom Daschle, the Democrat from South Dakota, and former Speaker of the House John Boehner. Worse so for Boehner, because he was such a hypocrite when he was in Congress against legalizing weed, and now he's making millions himself off it. But he's a piece of shit in my mind. Sorry, guys. What he did in so many different ways was so terrible for this country, specifically on immigration. I digress. Where do you see this headed right now? And at the end of the book, it's a really great section called the 5 pipe dreams that you debunk. You're gonna have to read it to buy it and read it to see what they are. But as we wrap up our conversation, I want to hear from both of you where you think it's going to go, and even if you want to give your take on your opinion where you'd like it to go. You first, Robin.
Sure. Well, first off, I'd say federal legalization is coming. We don't know when, but it's coming. In the book, we talk about what the weed market's going to look like in 2050, and we just start with the assumption that federal legalization has happened. And not many people think it's going to even take 30 years, or maybe it'll probably be in the next 10 years. The big open question, and I think the most important question for people trying to understand this industry and predict its future, is what form federal legalization will take. Will they just deschedule it, meaning take weed off the list of illegal narcotics and just let the states go on for a while doing what they're doing now, legalizing piecemeal? Or will the federal government take a more aggressive approach and impose a lot of regulations, taxes, licensing, things like that, the way they do with alcohol? We're not experts in the political process, and so we don't make specific predictions about what form it's going to take, but in the book we do try to say, here's what would happen if they do that. And when you look at the effective tax rates in a lot of the states, for example, where you have 30, 40, 50% taxes, in addition to all these regulatory costs, and you imagine the federal taxation adding even more to that, it all just results in a shift from legal to illegal, or it damages the viability of the legal weed market. So how much of the share of the market? We don't think illegal weed's ever going to go away completely. It's just there will always be ways of cutting corners and selling it more cheaply to the most price sensitive consumers, and that'll be around. But how much of a share legal weed has and how much they're able to push illegal out will depend a lot on how federal legalization is implemented.
Yeah. Dan, same question for you. Predict the future.
Yeah. So first step I wanted to say, Pete, is thank you very much. You're even in favor of free markets at the border when it comes to immigration.
Of
open markets. And that's what we're talking about with cannabis. So I like to say, let's make cannabis kale. So weed becomes watermelons. The federal government doesn't tax, you don't go to the watermelon store and pay federal taxes. It's treated like any other crop. It's treated like any other retail product. You're right. If Colorado's good at growing watermelons, that's what you buy. Other than the local season, you'll have a little New York season for watermelons. I have a buddy up in Vancouver who was so proud of his handful of strawberries he could get in Vancouver for 2 weeks out of the year. But other than that, they were great, by the way. I don't want to ever say a bad word about Vancouver strawberries. They're great. But the point is, the more we can open the market and have government step back, the more it'll be naturally a legal product. And the sort of things that you started off telling us, that some people just would like to encourage products to be legal. Great. It's very hard to ask people to do that if you tax it and regulate it to death. And that's the challenge. I think we're moving in that direction. I certainly hope that our statement about the feds is don't screw it up. If they just let it go and not screw it up, that's the best we can hope for. And then states will gradually move in that direction. One of the stories we tell in the book is about Oklahoma. So you had Oklahoma saying, we're a dry state. We want to regulate this because it's a bad thing. But once the people of Oklahoma said, let it be free, then what kicked in Oklahoma is, gee, we're business people here. Business wants to be free, fine. So they took off their regulations and went an unregulated route for the most part. We'll see.
Guys, I really appreciate talking to you. I love the book. I hope people get it. Robin, I really like you. Daniel, is it true? I read up on you, and I do feel like you've kind of exposed yourself. Are you in the pocket of big watermelon and kale? Are you a lobbyist? Yeah. You have brought it up so many times. And I know you've got a history. Who's paying you, sir?
Let me say this. When I was 8 years old, I made a living growing watermelons.
Well, that explains a lot.
There you go.
Yeah. That is a fascinating story. I want to hear more about that.
That's the God's honest truth.
Where?
California. I grew up halfway between Berkeley and Davis.
They're hard to grow. I was just looking to maybe plant some, and they sell a freaking at a garden store, a hammock for your watermelon so it doesn't touch the ground. That's ridiculous, right?
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
All right.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, congratulations on the book and working together. And I really appreciate it. And we'll be following you and on this issue and so many more. And look forward to have you back. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Pete. This was fun.
Yep. Bye-bye.
All right. I pressed stop and just wanted to say again, thank you. Do you guys have to run real quick?
Nope.
No, I've got a minute.
Okay.